I'm Susan. As mentioned, I do content and marketing at a company called Reforge that specializes in training and advancement for growth professionals. And then I'm also a venture partner at 500 Startups, where for the past few years I've helped hundreds of portfolio companies with their content strategy and with email as a channel to deliver that. So without further ado, today we're going to talk about content and growth. And I'll warn you, content is a really, really, really big subject. It's not a channel, it's a strategy. And so I tried to boil this down into some things that you could take away, but it's not going to be as trick heavy just because it's a strategy rather than a channel focus. And I'll address some of the biggest concerns related to content, namely ROI, resurrection of people that aren't listening to you anymore, and how to actually get conversions from something as fuzzy as content. All right, so first of all, before we get started, tell me if this sounds familiar. You're working really hard on a piece of content, you spend a bunch of hours on it, you're getting all pumped while anticipating the triple or even quadruple digit shares, and you're practically salivating at the thought of all of those juicy backlinks that you're about to get. Only instead of all that stuff, this happens. Or maybe something like this. Or, in other words, this. You get a little spike, and then it's 2-page views from there on out. When in reality, you were expecting this. So here's the deal. I've heard this sad truth hundreds of times when talking to startups, both big and mid-stage. My content marketing is not working, I'm not getting ROI, nobody wants to share it, it's not getting distribution. And that's understandable because peak content is real. So there are 300 hours of video uploaded to YouTube per minute. That's their official stat, so maybe it's even higher. There are 1.97 million blog posts published per day, and that's on WordPress alone. There are over 1 million books published per year, and over half of those are self-published, which means they're probably content marketing. And most of those books are getting 250 sales or less. They're selling 250 copies or less per book. So in other words, the nation is awash in content marketing. We're about to enter an election. You guys maybe know of that quote, or maybe not. Not all former history geeks like myself. But it's not content's fault, all right? Content might be a little bit of a beast, but it's really trying to help us. So if you build it, they will come is not an effective content marketing strategy. Anybody remember Field of Dreams? Or everybody's already too young for that? So basically, sorry folks, this only happens in Kevin Costner movies. So today, we are going to cover 2 content frameworks, or looks, if you will, for how you can build a high ROI content strategy from the ground up. And a quick word of caution before we proceed. If you're looking for a bag of tricks, you better save yourself a few minutes of your day on watching this talk and just go Google that instead. There's a lot of tricks out there. Content tricks can be great as optimizations, layered on top of a robust strategy, but no amount of tricks can replace solid frameworks for content-based growth. No amount of BuzzFeedy headlines can replace having a strategy in place. So let's get to what those frameworks are. Do you like this headline, by the way? I wrote it by myself. Not copied. Framework number 1, content market fit. So content market fit is actually both really simple and a little bit complex. It's simple because it's made up of just 2 things. 1, great content, and 2, a market that actually wants it. Now, Ipsy is a 500 Startups company that has some of the strongest content market fit that I've personally ever seen. And here is the key to Ipsy's content market fit. They started with the market fit. Michelle Fan, pictured here and in the previous slide, uploaded her first video in 2007. It got 40,000 views within the first week, which was a lot for that time. And today, that same video has over 11.5 million views. Not bad. So makeup tutorials are a natural fit for YouTube because of 3 factors that are great at illustrating content market fit. Number 1, demographics. Who's on YouTube? Number 2, content demand. So note that 70% of YouTube video searches begin with how to, and YouTube is the 2nd largest search engine in the world, second to you-know-who. In other words, people are looking for instructional content on YouTube. They're looking for exactly instructional content. Number 3, there's a solid match between content format over here and platform format over on the YouTube side. It's visuals, it's colors, it's sound, it's movement, it's videos. 3 years later, when Ipsy was started, the founders Marcelo and Jennifer knew that they had to bring on board a partner to anchor what they suspected would become their biggest growth loop ever, rightly so, content. And Michelle was the perfect partner. She had a substantial built-in following, she had an existing content brand, on top of a key platform for their demographic and product category, on a discovery portal and advertising platform that with over 1 billion users around the world watching over 40 minutes of video content per session, a lot of those on mobile, was exactly the growth channel that they needed. All right, so how can you get content market fit? That's fine and good for Ipsy, but how can you do this? So here's my checklist, and you can score yourself on these. Is there a market for your content? Does it have enough reach and engagement for you to bank your growth on it? For example, YouTube, enormous reach, enormous engagement, 40 minutes per session. Do your platforms actually reach your segment? You need to look for a demographic fit and a match between content format and platform. So if your platforms aren't reaching your segment, that might be something like you're trying to use YouTube to reach somebody like my mom, who's a 62-year-old Chinese American lady who doesn't watch YouTube. That's the segment, that's the platform. Next, is there actually a demand amongst your segment, again, amongst your segment, for your content type? And finally, a bonus. Is there someone who has created their own little corner of your content market with their own built-in audience that you can work together with? So here's a quick recap of what we just covered. 1, peak content is real. There are literally hundreds of millions of new pieces of content being created every single day, hundreds of millions. To compete, you can't just throw it out there. You have to be strategic and implement frameworks for success before you even start. 2, if you build it, they won't necessarily come. You have to spend half your time on distribution. This is something that I'm always kind of nagging our portfolio companies on, is that you have to spend half your time on distribution. Content creation is just the first half. And better that that time be spent on pre-ensuring distribution, guaranteeing that it's going to be there for you when you release by making sure you have content market fit. Really hard to market something when you don't have product market fit or content market fit. 3, frameworks are always better than content tactics. Tactics can be a great booster, I won't lie. It's a great bonus, and they will work for the short-term spark on top of a strong framework. But again, no amount of BuzzFeedy headlines can replace BuzzFeed itself, which is actually a major content engine. 4, speaking of which, content market fit is the absolute key. It's where it's at. It's actually the foundation of making sure that your content-based growth loop is actually a growth loop. It's actually going to help you grow. And finally, there's a solution to all of this stuff. You can use the content market fit checklist to make sure that you have something there for you before you get started, before you start throwing a bunch of resources behind your content strategy. And hey, content is expensive. It takes a lot of resources. I always tell our companies, don't expect results within the first 6 months. It's going to be a thankless first 6 months of working really hard to build out your foundation before you can start seeing all of those results come in. But boy, when they start coming in, it starts to feel like, money when you sleep, so to speak. So again, if you find content market fit, there's still one more really big pitfall waiting to sabotage your content growth efforts. And it is what I call the customer awareness cycle mismatch. A little bit of a mouthful. In other words, you can think of it as selling a retirement plan to a high schooler, or maybe selling a SaaS product to this guy. Now here's the second framework I want to introduce you guys to. It's called the customer awareness lifecycle. It goes from unaware to problem aware to solution aware to product aware. So most of us are focusing all of our efforts here on this last stage, trying to make people more aware of our product, trying so hard, graspy and all anxious to sell them on our brand over everybody else. But actually, our own worst enemy isn't the only direct competition. Our own worst enemy is our lack of focusing over here. Now, just to go back really quickly to that high schooler example, you can think of it a little bit as the evolution of your customer. So let's say your high schooler or your banana-eating chimp finally realizes the benefit of a retirement account. She's gotten a little older, she's not in high school anymore, she's moved from completely unaware to possibly problem aware. She starts to think, oh, hey, what happens when I got my first job, but what happens when I'm older and not working anymore, but I still need money? And then all the way over to solution aware. A retirement account could be the solution to help me with that particular problem. Let's say also in this scenario that you're a trusted childhood friend who's helped her to move through all of those stages. And, by the way, you also happen to sell a financial product. When she's ready to be product aware at that last consideration stage, who is the first person or brand that she's going to turn to? And if you're not seeing ROI in your content, first check in. Are you pushing for too much too soon? Espresso is another 500 startups company that really, in my opinion, really gets it right with the customer awareness lifecycle. They spend 95% of their time and resources talking to people at the 3 earlier stages of the customer awareness lifecycle. They have, here's some stats from them, they have 5,000 customers. They're processing 1% of Facebook's entire ad revenue. One little company, that's actually really a lot, even though it's 1%. Just imagine, Facebook just came out with their earnings this week, $1.79 billion in ad revenue, 1% of that. All of that with a sales team of, how many people do you think? 0. The number is actually 0. And instead relying only on a sales force, quote unquote, of content marketing, drip emails, and product onboarding. Last month, they got 335,000 uniques, and they're converting 50 to 60% of their visitors to subscription. So content enables Espresso to get warmer leads at significantly lower cost, and because of this, they actually get their CAC back in the first month. They get their cost of acquisition back in the first month. That's really good for a SaaS product. They are multi-platform and multi-format. They've got blog posts, ebooks, webinars, video, entire video courses, multi-instance courses, a newsletter to redistribute those blog posts, slide share presentation, and an online community. So 95% of Espresso's content falls here. And this is my own little plotting of exactly how that breaks down. Their blog posts are what help people go from unaware of their marketing problem over to aware that, yes, they do indeed have a marketing problem related to social media and Facebook ads. Their video courses, newsletter, or kind of more advanced blog posts and other materials take people from problem aware over to solution aware. By that time, when they go into the ebooks and the webinars that you have to actually register for and continue to qualify for, they have developed a long and trusted teacher and student kind of relationship with their target audience. And that is the perfect time to finally start talking about the product, not any earlier. 2 quick examples. This example shows their Ad Espresso Academy, the name for kind of like their big learning center, and their big content marketing library. As you can see, this page focuses visitors around content consumption. It's optimized for content consumption, not purchase. There's very little content that talks about Ad Espresso, the product. In fact, none that you can see right here. There's a little bit of a pricing link that's off screen. In this other example, their ads gallery is an interactive data. It's a video. I don't know if you can see it's moving. It's an interactive database of tens of thousands of ad examples that you can check out and even click through to the landing page so you can actually study the full funnel of those ads. This is an engagement device, a tool that can educate and offer value to people before they're really ready to consider any sort of ad products that Ad Espresso is offering. Quick little story. There's so little product-focused content in Ad Espresso's library that the team told me that they still, to this day, get customers who convert, who were readers of Ad Espresso's content for years without knowing that there was a product on offer. They actually didn't even know, and then they got surprised afterward. They were in learn mode, not buy mode, and they were getting marketed to accordingly. So if you're wondering why you keep scaring all the conversions away, use the customer awareness lifecycle template to plot out every single piece of your content. Where does it fall? It should look something like this. Okay, there's one wrench in all of this that I want to draw your guys' attention to. It's peak content striking again. With so much content, the number of products and brands that people are thinking about at the product-aware stage of the life cycle, the last stage, gets bigger and bigger. And it's actually possible for upstarts to jump in, to elbow you out, and actually disrupt all of that nurture that you've been investing in. In fact, studies have found that people are looking at between 2 and 4 brands across different categories, even at the very final consideration point of the product-aware stage of their life cycle. In other words, you've got competition. But here is the silver lining. When there are too many choices, most of us in most purchase categories, not just cars, will just default to the old standard that we already know and trust. In other words, if you're in there early, from unaware to solution aware, you are 3 times more likely to win out, even as new players try to interject themselves at the product-aware stage of the awareness lifecycle. And I think that's really good news. So here's one last bonus mini framework to help you remember all of that. And I just call it the 90-10 framework. It's pretty obvious, but sometimes it's good to kind of see it mapped out. So in the 90-10 framework, you want to make sure that 90% of your content is focused on nurture, 90% or even more. As in Ad Espresso's case, it's 95%. And only 10% of your content, that's kind of your behind closed doors content, once you get them onto your email list, that's what's oriented around conversion. Don't push for too much too soon. All right, so almost done, last slide. I'm getting the cane here. Quick recap. Number 1, the customer awareness mismatch is your enemy in content strategy. Don't make your customers deal with too much too soon. Second, we talked about the customer awareness lifecycle framework for content, taking people from unaware to problem aware to solution aware to product aware at the very, very end. 3, and that's why it's very important to educate before you sell, and primarily to educate. Because 4, early awareness equals triple your chance of winning the final conversion. And number 5, a small bonus framework, which is 90-10. Make sure you cash in on that early awareness and be in both the fallback and in the active consideration phases fallback and active consideration phases. Make sure you're spending 90% of your efforts on nurturing so you're right there when it's time to convert. And that is it. It's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. And questions. So we'll go to questions. Oh, how do you strategize distribution? Influencers are great, but can be expensive. Not always open to more promotional content, and are not typically a scalable solution. This is a great question. Let me just clarify a couple of things. Not typically a scalable solution. Completely disagree. Sorry, completely disagree with that. It's a very scalable solution if you do it right. So Ipsy, in the example that I cited earlier, Ipsy is a company that's basically built all of their content distribution on influencers 100%. And it's become very, very scalable. I think, gosh, I don't know if I can remember the stat, but they have something like, they have hundreds of influencers under their kind of bigger umbrella. And across all of their influencers, I think they have something like 40 million total views subscribers on YouTube. And so they've been able to scale that really well because, and this is getting into the other part of the question, influencers are great but can be expensive. They don't actually go for the biggest influencers. So I think it's really looking at somebody's trajectory and their slope rather than where they are in the graph right now. If you're optimizing for an influencer that's really high on the y-axis right now, they are going to be really expensive, and it is going to be really hard to scale that because there are fewer of them and they're really hard to convert. So instead of optimizing for like the y-intercept, I would, as Sam Altman says, I would really optimize for that slope when looking for influencers. So looking for influencers who are rising, not risen. And that's a way to make it a little bit more affordable. The middle part of the question, if they're not always open to more promotional content, you know what? They shouldn't be open to promotional content. As I said before, content is about nurture and education. It's not about conversion or the hard sell. If your influencers are doing the hard sell, if you're asking them to do the hard sell, they lose all their influence. So that's just how it works. You know, we have here in 2016 Q4, we're extremely sophisticated consumers, and we know how to smell a rat when we smell one. And we're very, very sensitive to being advertised to in general. And so just to recap that question, for finding influencers, really optimize for their trajectory, not for where they're at right now. Look for rising but not risen influencers. For how do you get them to do your promotional content for you? You know, the influencer has a close relationship with their audience. They're the one who really knows how to speak to and nurture their audience better than you do. So they actually know the right content better than you do. And if they're giving you a pushback on promotional content, that's because they actually know that from building that audience from the ground up. And then third, if it's not scalable, well, I think actually it is really scalable, and it kind of goes back to that first question of where you're sourcing them from. The next question is, how do you start from scratch with blogging? Should you start on Medium? It's hard to be heard through the noise without an influencer. Totally agree, very hard to be heard through the noise without an influencer, which goes back to the earlier question. It is actually, nowadays, I tend to think of content strategy and content marketing more just as your influencer strategy. There is so much noise with peak content and all the rest that it's very hard to differentiate yourself and start as a nobody. But that doesn't mean you can't get started with influencers per my previous comment. And should you start on Medium or should you start from scratch with your own site? There's that could be a whole conversation. Medium is a product, and it's a really powerful platform with all these kind of built-in notifications. It's a social platform, so it has a lot of benefits with all these, you publish something on Medium and then all of these people are gonna get auto-notified via their email. Medium is doing a lot of the distribution, kind of heavy lifting for you. On the other hand, you don't really own those people. Those are Medium users. You can't really get them to click through. Click-through rates on Medium are notoriously not very good. You can't get SEO juice from Medium because you don't really own that. And so I think, thinking about Medium versus your own site, to me, it's kind of a strategic question of, where do you think, it's a much bigger question, where do you think Medium is going to go in 5 years? Do you think Medium is going to offer, for example, email collection or content monetization as a company strategy for Medium in the next 5 years? If so, then maybe it's worthwhile to get on there early and build up, a mass, like land grab on Medium and have, hundreds of thousands of followers on Medium right now when it seems to be a no ROI platform, but then by the time it, introduces ROI features or advertising features, you're going to have all that built-in audience. I don't know. It depends on what you think. That's one side of it. On the other side of it, kind of more traditional content marketing would say it's always better to own those users. It's always better to bring them onto your turf so you can collect their emails. That's what I used to say all the time. But now, I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that, and it really depends on your business. Another question, what metrics do you use to measure the ROI of content? So this is a really good question, and I think it depends on what the content is meant to do for you. Some of the metrics that I have used will include everything from, and also the relationship between each of these, but sessions, so actual traffic sessions, visits, specifically emails collected, and I want to know what is the relationship between the number of emails collected and how much traffic I got on something. So I want to know generally how big did it get, and I want to know also how much did it actually convert to email collection for me of people who are just interested in my content. Another thing you can look at is, which is kind of like a proxy for how big did it get, is things like shares. And then even it's more nuanced within that. So not just shares, but who's sharing and where are they sharing. So Twitter, in my experience, Twitter is like a high volume share platform, but low quality. So you get really, really low click-throughs on Twitter for content sharing. But on the other hand, there is some of that kind of social validation when there's all this like ambient awareness going around about your content. Facebook sends better referrals. Upvote sites like Growth Hackers or Reddit or inbound.org and any other site that is relevant to your community can be much better for actually sending quality referrals and traffic over to your site. But they're simply not going to get the same kind of reach that a Twitter is. LinkedIn might be really good if you're a SaaS business, but it probably isn't going to be very good if you're a baby list, right? So it's not only looking at sort of like the absolute number, but all of the qualifications of that number. Who is it? Where are they doing it? That's just some of the metrics that I look at. And then finally, kind of one other metric category that's really important to me is the delta from one instance to the next. So I want to make sure, I'm always really, really interested in change over time. I want to make sure, for example, with my emails, that not only is open rate a solid whatever percent that it's at, I want to make sure that the open rate delta is not more than, say, 5 or 10% between one email and the next email. Because that delta is telling me just as much as the absolute open rate is itself. And so, bringing that over to content, same thing applies. I want to look at actually sort of what's the differential and how big are the peaks and how low are the valleys, what's the differential between those. That's also an important sort of metric that I tend to look at. Do we have time for one more question? One more? Okay, one more. You mentioned that half of your time should be focused on distribution of content. What strategies do you have for distribution after your content is created? This is a really huge question that I don't know if I can address in the next 60 seconds. But basically, the distribution of the content really kind of goes back to the very beginning of the creation of the content. It is the classic chicken or egg question. Did the chicken come first or did the egg come first? So with distribution, I actually think that it needs to be baked into the creation of the product itself. So that, again, it comes back to content market fit. If you have content market fit from the very beginning, if you already sort of like know that there's going to be a market for your content from the very beginning, then the distribution doesn't feel like such an uphill slog or a push, or like you're selling all your friends to go and upvote stuff for you, which I've felt like sometimes. And how can you sort of control for content market fit from the very beginning? You can look for signals, right? There's a lot of kind of really simple, basic signals out there. You can go on Twitter and go on Twitter Advanced Search or do a hashtag search and see what people are talking about, see what sort of themes, and not only themes, but specific word phrases in the language of those sharers themselves, what specific word phrases are getting a lot of traction, are getting a lot of interest. That would be one thing. You can do the same on Google Trends. You can do the same on BuzzSumo, which will tell you the amount of shares, the amount of backlinks something got. Now, don't let BuzzSumo be, sort of like your North Star, because something could have gotten a lot of shares or a lot of backlinks for a lot of other reasons besides the fact that it was good content market fit from the beginning. Maybe, whoever created that had a great network. Maybe they're using like, bots in some other country with like a bunch of different IP addresses to upvote stuff or post stuff for them. You don't know. But it gives you sort of an idea of, how popular certain things are over versus certain other things are. So before you distribute, I would actually think about distribution, or before you worry about distribution after the fact, I would actually think about distribution from the very seed of the content itself and make sure that, you don't release to crickets chirping. All right, I think that's it. Thank you guys very much for your time. Really appreciate it.